USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com, featuring conversations with college hockey coaches and players and journalists who cover the sport.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Jim's excited. I'm excited for the NCAA playoffs, but we've got a guest now who's probably more excited than anybody in the country.
And joining us now, he is the voice of the NCAA tournament on ESPN, especially the Frozen Four, well known for his hashtag college hockey, as good of a Boston accent as he can make it. John Buccigross. John, welcome. It's that time of year. How excited are you?
Ready to go. This is finals week for me, trying to cram, 4 teams, trying to get as many names and numbers so it's as reflexive as possible. Luckily, I've got Wisconsin already pretty good. Called a game this year and some games last year, so that those number of names mesh together pretty well. Same with UMass. I've watched a lot of their games here in New England, so just cramming more for Bemidji and Lake and trying to give the parents who are watching and the student athletes a great broadcast.
Hey, we're definitely here to talk college hockey. But before I jump in, the announcement a few weeks ago that the NHL is coming back to ESPN after a really long pause. How excited does that make you? I mean, I know personally, Ed and I were saying, I said, it just gave me the reason to buy ESPN Plus. I never had my reason until now.
Yeah, well, hopefully it extends my career. That's my main priority. So that could be a good thing for me. But yeah, it was really neat the day it happened. The announcement was really cool. I think it probably surprised ESPN executives. They probably thought there would be a little bit of a buzz and energy the day of the announcement. But I think even they were probably shocked at how much goodwill there was for the most part on social media. And now that puts the pressure on to deliver, which is great. And hopefully, they'll start to make their decisions on shows and broadcast teams and how all that works. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully at some point I'll talk with them and see what they have in mind.
Well, John, we'll talk the NCAA tournament here and we'll go region by region. But before I even get into that, what are your thoughts just on the whole process? Obviously, there was no pairwise this year. This was a little bit more subjectivity. What were your thoughts? Were you surprised by any of the bracket when it was announced on Sunday?
Not too much. I don't get really into that stuff for the most part because it's, once it's announced, it seems like all the energy that went into those discussions just kind of vaporizes. And so it's just, for the most part, if you take care of business, if you win the games, you should win. If you win enough of them, you create a buffer where you're fine. And if you're on the bubble, it's kind of your own fault. And you just needed to win a couple more games against good teams and take care of business, and you wouldn't be in that position. So for the most part, there's not a big difference, really probably from teams 10 to 18. So there just is a limited number of teams who get in, and there's always going to be some sort of bubble. And that's just, that's just the way it goes. I really do feel like if you can always win your games to put, to take any doubt out.
The tournament will kick off in the Bridgeport Regional Friday, 1:00 Eastern time. It'll be number 1 seed in that region, Wisconsin, taking on Bemidji State. You, along with Barry Melrose, Colby Cohen, you'll have the call of that game. Break that matchup down a little bit with me. What do you like about Wisconsin? Obviously, there's a guy named Cole Caulfield that everybody likes. And then maybe what might Bemidji State bring to the table here to potentially be the spoiler?
Yeah, Wisconsin is really going. This really is a really good team for Tony Granato. They have a good combination of, experience, which is so important. I call them kind of 100 gamers, guys who have played 100 games, in their college career. That is so important to have those guys in their early to really almost mid-20s. Their power play is unbelievable, 31.5%. It just cooks. And, since the start of the new year, they're 15-4-1. So they're really going. And I think the big reason, besides Caulfield, obviously, he's the superstar of college hockey. Dylan Holloway, the way he's vaulted his game, when he plays, they're 17-4-1. And he, might be the best player in college hockey the last month and a half. And, he is just an absolute star. So to have two stars like that, and then again to have those, like I said, those guys who have played 100 games. Weisbach is a guy who's he's played over 125 games. Tarek Baker, these are 100-game guys, and on the back end as well with Josh S. and Emberson and Inamoto. So they're experience and skill. And the goaltenders look pretty good. They go back and forth to Baydun and Rowe, but I really like, how they play. But obviously, for anybody who plays them, it's scoring first, going into your shell, and then trying to frustrate them. But it's just, will they have enough to offset all that star power? That's the big challenge. And of course, when in those kinds of situations, you need the game of your goaltender's life. That's what it comes down to a lot.
Looking at the other half of that regional, UMass and Lake Superior State University, Damon Witten trying to get the Lakers back to the glory days of a couple decades ago, and a UMass team that everybody seems to know now.
Yeah, UMass has really vaulted themselves into the upper echelon of college hockey. What Greg Carbo was doing with the help of his young AD and all the money they've raised and the facilities upgrade, the locker room announcement today. This I think they're here to stay for a long time. And I talk about some of that experience, even their top end, Carson Gusevich and Jake Gaudette and Oliver Chow. I mean, these are three guys. I mean, Chow he's going to turn 24 this summer. Jake Gaudette is going to turn 25. Gusevich is also 24. So that's like an American Hockey League line that you got playing college hockey. And then, of course, Trevino's vaulted up into a really good player, almost a Brad Marchand kind of guy who's skillful and in your face and confrontational. Lapina's a great freshman. Again, Laganoff, another experienced guy. Their back end, Farmer and Felix and Delgaizo. Then you bring in Jones and Kessel, who are real high-end offensive guys. Lindbergh was a rock against UMass Lowell. I can see, the Minutemen coming out of this regional and really giving a team, if North Dakota gets there, a great game. Like, I really do believe Minutemen would be a good bet. I imagine you get pretty good odds on them, but you're looking for a sleeper to win it all. I think they can do it.
Moving on, and by the way, you mentioned the locker room upgrade at UMass, a $2 million announcement today that they are upgrading their locker room at the Mullen Center. But second semifinal out west at the Fargo Regional on Friday. Leah Hextall and Dave Starman have the call. The starting game in that, not going to be the number one seed because that's the host North Dakota, but it'll start with Minnesota, Duluth, and Michigan. I know you've had a chance to follow these teams from afar this year. What do you like about this matchup?
Well, certainly, the Bulldogs are trying to make it 3 in a row, if you count the lost year. And so, just will that experience pay off against a very young team? Kind of, we talked about the experience that Wisconsin and UMass have. Can a young team like Michigan, with all those number one draft picks and the number one draft picks they're going to have this summer as well with Power and Johnson and Beniers, 3 more will go this year. Probably in the top 15. Obviously, Power's going to go top 3. And then Johnson and Beniers are really high end. So, but, it's hard to win as a young team in college hockey for those reasons I told you earlier, guys in their mid-20s. This is really almost it for them. This is their biggest moment. So they're all in. How much do those young guys look to the next level? Do I turn pro? Where will I be drafted? A lot of that's going on right now. I think we saw Boston College maybe get distracted by stuff like that. So, Minnesota Duluth is, they're the big dogs of college hockey. They have a very interesting culture, probably the tightest type of culture in college hockey. They look for a particular dude in Duluth, and they usually find them. 14-10-2 this year in a very tough league. So, they don't quite have that vaunted D-core they had, which they might never have again. That was obviously once in a generation. But, Michigan, when they get going with that young talent, you wonder, they might be the fastest sports car on the block. But you got to do it, 4 times in a row. You can't have a bad game. And that's when you're young with all those distractions, it's harder. So that's the big question mark there.
And in the late game, the number 1 overall seed, North Dakota, taking on American International College.
Yeah, it's such a challenge to go to Fargo. I know there's not, when it's sold out, then it's really a challenge, but there's still enough of a challenge. So, but for AIC and Eric Lang, he's a young up and coming coach who's going to look to go to the next level whenever these vacancies occur. And so for him, in some ways, it's the biggest mountain to climb, but why not? You want to take that on so people see your logo and hear your school name said and get comfortable with it, because I'm sure people still hear it now and say, what's that? What is an AIC? And so it's good for his brand to build that school. And for North Dakota, I just think they're really the big favorite in this tournament. I think they're really a notch above everybody else by a decent margin. It's their tournament to win. They have it all. They have experience. They have talent. They have really grindy guys too, which you love. So, but hey, they're young kids. They can have a bad game. A goalie can let in a bad goal. Bounces can go your way. It's a low-scoring sport, so certainly you're prone to upsets, unlike a basketball. But again, I think North Dakota is the team to watch.
2 regions down, 2 to go with John Buccigross when we return.
This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
We're previewing the NCAA Field of 16 with ESPN's John Buccigross.
Moving on to Saturday's games, and we'll start in Albany. That will kick off coverage on ESPN News on Saturday. It'll be number 1 Boston College, a team with a lot of experience in the NCAA tournament, against number 4 Notre Dame. This is a true battle of the Catholics. This used to be one of those games that were always there. Kevin Brown, Sean Richland on the call for ESPN on that one. Here we are. I mean, this is a rivalry matchup that we're getting in the first round of an NCAA tournament.
Yeah, the Lord be with you, and also with you. This is a good one. Obviously, the football, when they play in football, it's a big deal. And I'm really curious to see these young Boston College players, that top line, Hardman, Boldy, and Newhook, probably moving on to play pro hockey. Are their minds on the task at hand? Is this the most important thing in their life at the moment? And that's how you got to play tournament hockey. If it's not, you'll lose. Notre Dame is tough to play against. It's going to be frustrating. If they get the first goal, that's going to make it tough on the Eagles. Spencer Knight was not good against UMass Lowell. Is his head in the game? Is he going to be, World Junior Spencer Knight, or is he going to be average Spencer Knight? So that's, again, BC, it's going to be fun to watch their mindset and see how they come out against a Notre Dame team who was the last team in. Because of the St. Lawrence COVID situation, that's why they're in the tournament. So sometimes a team like that can be dangerous. Last one in, new life, no pressure, and off they go. So BC's better be ready.
The other half of the matchup, you got to really like seeing Brett Larson, St. Cloud State, coming all the way back from a rebuilding year last year. And then BU hoping on the next night to be able to take on their arch rival.
Yeah, I've really liked watching BU play this year. I know their analytic numbers aren't great, but the games I've seen them play, they're fast, they're in your face, they're edgy. And so I know there wasn't a huge sample size this year, but I really think they're a strong squad that needs to be reckoned with. Yeah, St. Cloud State got that good start. Early in the year they beat Denver. They beat Omaha, who ends up getting in the tournament. Beat North Dakota as well in early December, So their schedule was tough early. And then, then you kind of from there, you're kind of going back and forth. You're splitting against Minnesota Duluth. And then you go sweep Minnesota Duluth at their place. So, yeah, Brett Larson and St. Cloud State in that tough conference, playing Duluth a lot this year, playing North Dakota multiple times. Not as likely not as much, only 3 times. Other teams in the league really got a tough challenge, but they should be ready. They should be tournament ready, and so maybe all those games, and 27 of them, against some really hard opponents, maybe it'll make for a good tournament run. So maybe that regional better watch out.
The final regional, Loveland, Colorado, and that will be kicked off by the number 2 Minnesota State team against a Quinnipiac team that did not win its postseason title. Maybe a lot of people saw St. Lawrence winning that ECAC championship game as a bit of an upset, but I've always known Rand Pecknall's teams to bounce back pretty well, but it's still a tall task in front of them when you have a goalie like Dryden McKay on the other side.
It is, and Minnesota State, can they win that elusive tournament game. Another great regular season, 24-1. This is a good uniform game as well. I like this. But yeah, and maybe Quinnipiac got a little bored playing the same teams over and over again. That can happen. The same teams. And so maybe this will give them a new life. They have players who will play at the next level. Pretty good balance all the way around, forwards, D, goalie. Of course, the coach had a real great last decade, taking his team to a couple of national championship games. So, maybe this new opponent will help them. But obviously, the team that scores first here is going to be really important. And so it's kind of cool. It's like one of those games where someone's going to really be happy to get to the second round. And these are, sometimes obviously it's for some teams it's boom or bust. We've got to get there, or it'd be like, hey, no pressure. But for these two teams, there's a little bit of pressure. You want to win one tournament game. You just don't want to, make the trip and then go home. So this is one of those situations where someone's going to really be pleased that they won that first round tournament game, because it's kind of an even-Steven matchup.
And then that regional wraps up with Minnesota. Bob Motzko really establishing his team now at Minnesota. And then Mike Gabinet doing a terrific job with the Mavericks, as they were a bubble team that got in.
Yeah, again, we talk about, those teams like Omaha, that tough schedule. Again, they got off to a pretty good start easy. They open up the year and they beat Minnesota Duluth. So, they got to feel good. But they take advantage of playing Miami and Colorado College a lot. But then again, all the times they had to play North Dakota, 6 times this year they played North Dakota. That's got to get you ready. They were able to beat them once. They lost the game in overtime. But they played Denver pretty well. And so again, another team that should be kind of ready to go up against the Minnesota team. But Minnesota is really fast. They were really cohesive at the start of the year. Just a lot of really good hockey players. And then, again, you look for teams that guys make a jump. And Sampo Ranta is one of those guys who is he's made that jump. He's an absolute wagon. He's tough to handle. He's learned how to play like a bully. And I've always said big guys should play like small guys to really dominate. And he gives them kind of that factor. And again, they have obviously McLaughlin and Sammy Walker, who kind of rounded out, very talented on the back end. LaFontaine's really good in net. So, they had to win a couple overtimes. It could have gone either way for them in the Big Ten tournament, but here they are. And that's a really good matchup. It's obviously there's no cakewalks in this. And that's the kind of game where Minnesota can have this great year. You win the tournament in your conference, and then bam, it could end just like that. That's why it's always so heartbreaking in NCAA sports, because you're on this kind of crusade. You're feeling good. It's all about momentum. The prize is just 4 games away, and it could end just like that, and it could end like that in overtime where it's an instant, and which makes it, of course, so compelling and so heartbreaking when you're really involved. So this is one of those things where you have a good year, but it could end in a snap. And so the Gophers got to be ready, because Omaha's formidable.
John, before I let you go, obviously, 2 regions will have fans, the Fargo and the Albany regions. The one you'll be in down in Bridgeport and Loveland, they will not have fans. And I know these players have been around these empty buildings for a bunch of the year, but this is a national tournament where you're going to have some kids or student athletes maybe is the better term, trying to generate their own energy, generate their own momentum. Does that change things, when you may be playing in these empty buildings for a national championship?
Yeah, I think it can only really help because, like you said, so many were used to not doing it, and what the Stanley Cup playoffs did last spring and summer and fall, actually, would show that these guys are still really motivated. And sometimes, I always kind of laugh. They were around me like a beer league game when you hear these guys screaming at each other. You can hear echoes throughout the arena. No one's watching, but they're still, just still going all at it because they're so competitive. So obviously they're trained to do this. Let's face it, some of the regionals never had big crowds anyway. So they always had to kind of learn to do that. Fargo was certainly one exception where they would load that place. And I always said, I remember Quinnipiac had to go there. And it's almost impossible to beat North Dakota and Fargo in a full barn. But they would rather have that than go somewhere with 800 students. They want that. They're okay with that. So, yeah, teams going to Fargo, where, as you mentioned, with some fans, that'll probably be a better crowd than Albany. But even a few like that, I think, will help. The other people are used to it. It's too bad we couldn't squeeze in 1,000 people who could be spread out outside of friends and family, which we'll have in those 2 other places. Certainly in Bridgeport, I'll be. There will be some, about 70 or 80 people there watching, friends and stuff, family members. So it's too bad. But for those who do have it, I think you could see a little bit of adrenaline for them.
Well, it's going to be a great tournament. We are always looking forward to it, looking forward to your call. You'll be alongside Barry Melrose, Colby Cohen, as we kick things off on Friday. So, John Buccigross, enjoy the calls of the games this weekend, and we'll see you in Pittsburgh at the Frozen Four.
Love it. See you there, boys. Thanks for having me.
Jim, it sounds like John Buccigross has spent some time getting ready for this tournament, and I know he follows the teams all season long. This is really shaping up to be what I think is going to be a fantastic tournament.
Yeah, I mean, he pointed out some of the really tough matchups that are in front of us. You and I have talked that Minnesota, Duluth, and Michigan are both teams that we could see in the Frozen Four. Well, they're going to play in the first game, and then if they survive, then they get the likely reward of playing North Dakota or an AIC's team that has just pulled off, one of the biggest upsets of all time. So, you also go into the Albany regional. You have BC and BU dying to get back to a Frozen Four, but then you throw in this, potential, Cinderella team, Notre Dame, that gets in at the last second. And don't forget, the last two times that we, had teams kind of waiting until the last second to get in was Yale, Providence, and Minnesota Duluth. All three of those teams all won the national championship. So it's not unheard of to see these teams that are last one in standing at the end. It's just how crazy the tournament can be. And I think that's why we all love it.
And don't overlook St. Cloud State. They came very close to an NCHC title themselves into the third period against North Dakota. Minnesota and Minnesota State, among all five Minnesota teams in the tournament. Minnesota State looks to get past the first round after 6 failures to do so. And they're going to take on a Quinnipiac team that we talked about, Omaha. They have been terrific at times and very good the rest of the time. And then there's the other region where both Wisconsin and UMass are teams we could see move on in Bridgeport, and 2 upstarts from the WCHA, the other part of that bracket. Just great stories in each region and terrific hockey. And again, we talked about it on Sunday night, but hats off again to the committee for pulling together a bracket that probably doesn't look too much different from one in a normal season if we had the pairwise. And I think they just did a terrific job in pulling things together. As I've had a couple of days to think about it, I can't imagine they could have done a better job.
No, I agree with you, Ed. And Paula Weston and I wrote about it in Tuesday Morning Quarterback today, that it took so much effort. It took so much kind of focus to not just let emotion cloud judgment. There was, despite the fact that you could call it a subjective selection process, there were a lot of objective criteria that were applied, particularly when it came to the bubble. Whatever they were, however they applied them, they were applied using numbers and not just using, what everybody was calling all year, this eye test. Yes, maybe there's a tiny bit of that in there, but at the same time, I just feel like the committee worked to make sure that at the end of the day, you could say, here's a reason this team got in. Here's a reason this team didn't. I think I wrote it in TMQ as well. Every team that got in on the right side of the bubble probably could point to one game that they played this year, maybe 2, that win got them into the tournament. And the teams that were on the wrong side of the bubble can point to 1, maybe 2 games that they're saying, boy, if we had won those, we'd probably be in.
Yeah, and 2 teams that were out where that probably most applies, Bowling Green and Providence. A game or 2 the other way, and they would have been in.
Agreed, especially against some of the bigger teams. If Bowling Green, had another win against one of the top 2 teams in the WCHA, if Providence gets a win against BC or a win against UMass, they didn't do either of those. They just had one against BU. Maybe that gets them in. So it's so small. And in Providence in there had 2 ties. So you're thinking how razor thin. If you turn those 2 ties into wins, they're probably in the tournament.
Well, USCHO will have coverage of all the regional games this weekend. Hope you check it out and hope you enjoy the hockey on ESPN networks. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Spotlight, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.